Good evening, our fellow Hong Kong ICPA and PIEA members. I'm Wendy Lam, Director of Corporate Communications of the Institute. Welcome to this Members Forum to learn about the engagement and consultation paper on further reform of the accounting profession launched by Financial Reporting Council. Today, we have our President, Ms. Loretta Fong, PIEA Chairman, Mr. Clement Chan, and from the FRC, we have their Chairman, Dr. Kelvin Wong, CEO, Mr. Marek Grabowski, Head of Discipline, Ms. Hester Leung, Acting Head of Inspection, Ms. Yvella, Head of Investigation and Compliance, Ms. Wincy Lam, and Acting Head of Oversight of Policy and Governance, Mr. Ambrose Wong. The forum will start by a welcoming remark by Hong Kong ICPA President Loretta. Over to you, President.
Thank you, Wendy. Welcome, members and colleagues from the Financial Reporting Council. The Institute is pleased to be hosting this webinar in conjunction with PIEA to give members the opportunity to better understand the engagement and consultation paper on further reform of the accounting profession that was issued by the FRC on the 9th of March. The number of enrollments show how important the subject of tonight's event is for the accounting profession in Hong Kong. Since the announcement by the government of the further regulatory reform proposals in June 2021, the Institute has been holding various member forums, survey to facilitate direct member engagement and to collect views from members and registered students. We have continued to provide regular communications to members up to and since the amendment bill, which was passed by LegCo on October 22nd, 2021. We have been providing analysis and commentary on subsidiary legislation, which will be considered by LegCo in May and June 2022, and are working with the FRC to ensure an effective and efficient transition of regulatory functions from the Institute to the AFRC. The changes being brought by the regulatory reform is going to affect the Institute and its members. The further reform aligns the Hong Kong regulatory regime with the international practice of independent regulation and oversight by the accountancy profession. All CPAs and practice units will be subject to regulations by AFRC through its registration, inspection, investigation, and disciplinary processes. For the Institute, the changes will be operational, structural, and strategic. And while no longer being responsible for functions it has fulfilled for many years, there will be opportunities to refocus efforts and resources on other areas such as member support and development, advocacy for the profession, and enhancing the reputation and standing of the profession and CPAs. The FRC engagement and consultation papers provides information on the rationale for AFRC's proposed disciplinary processes and approach to sanctions, and to assist stakeholders to understand the operation of the new regulatory framework. We appreciate the efforts that the FRC has put into developing these documents and its commitment to transparency and engagement. The FRC will be making a presentation to kick off this evening's proceedings, and then there will be plenty of time allowed to hear your views and questions. I trust that it will be a constructive process that will provide meaningful input to the consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Loretta. May I now invite PIEA President Clement to say a few words. Clement, please.
Thank you, Wendy. Good evening, members, friends. As President Loretta just mentioned earlier, I'm very, very pleased to be with you tonight on this forum about the engagement and consultation paper issued by the FRC. Like Loretta was saying, this is an excellent opportunity for our members, for stakeholders outside, to hear from the horse mouth on the issue of that consultation paper. What do they actually meant to achieve, and what sort of contents that they would like to draw our attention on. I guess the whole paper is important, like Loretta pointed out, and it's not just about PIE auditors now. It's about the whole population of auditors, as FRC has taken over the regulatory role from the Institute. So I guess I'm sure the paper will have far-reaching consequences and implication for us as practicing auditors in the market. And I know for a fact that tonight is one of the many sort of similar sections going to be done by FRC. As a matter of fact, I think FRC has done a few already outside. So you can tell how important they actually see this paper is. And I think they've left no stone unturned to reach out. And taking advantage of their reaching out, I think is perfect opportunity for us to really hit them with some sort of questions on particularly some of the things that they laid out on the paper. As they always say, the devil is in the details. I guess when you look at the question is very simple, asking whether it makes sense to have a conceptual principle statement rather than details, guidelines as in the past. But when you talk about conceptual guidance and policy, I guess there's a lot of details that need to be found out and really sort of look at the impact on the practical side. So without further ado, I just pass the time to FRC to get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Clement. Would FRC CEO Marek please also give us your remark? Marek, please.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for joining us. We're looking forward to sharing some information with you, but most importantly, hearing from you your comments and questions for us. With the current round of reforms, the FRC will be renamed the Accounting and Financial Reporting Council, the AFRC, and will become, as other speakers have mentioned, the independent regulator of the accounting profession in Hong Kong as a whole. We'll be taking on a number of new functions, and these include the licensing of CPA practicing practitioners, and also the registration of all practice units, including PIEA auditors. We'll also take on inspection, investigation and discipline for all practice units, and also investigation and discipline for all CPAs. And then finally, we'll also oversee the remaining statutory functions of the HKI CPA, which will include extending our remit to qualification and registration of CPAs, and the setting of assurance and accounting standards and CPD requirements for all CPAs. Well, the purpose of our event this evening is to engage and consult with you about our policy statements and outlines of our processes for our new functions, and indeed for some of our existing ones that are relevant. We welcome the views of all stakeholders, which will enable us to ensure that our policies and processes, when finalised, are fair and effective. And in a moment, because I know you want to hear about the details, those devils, as Clement mentioned, I'll be passing over to my colleagues who'll take you through some slides which will introduce some of the key features of our policy statements and processes to you. I hope you will then share your views and questions with us. And with that, let me thank you and hand over to our Head of Discipline, Hester Leung.
Thank you, Marek. And hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to join this webinar today to explain to our audience the changes to the disciplinary function after the further reform of the accounting profession. My presentation will cover 4 parts. First, our regulatory philosophy. Second, our consultation. Third, our disciplinary process. And fourth, our sanctions approach. Next slide, please. Our mission is to enhance the quality of financial reporting and audits. Therefore, our regulatory philosophy is that where there has been misconduct committed by regulators, we will take appropriate and timely disciplinary action to achieve the 4 objectives set out in the slide. As this is self-explanatory, I will not go into the details, but to highlight that parts of our objectives is to deter and protect. In other words, when imposing sanctions, our objective is not to punish, but to deter and to protect the public interest. With that, we will uphold proper standards of conduct amongst regulators and maintain and promote public confidence in the quality of financial reporting, as well as the integrity of the accounting profession, which will in turn benefit the profession. With that, let me move on to the consultation. Next, please. As all of you are aware, we launched a public consultation exercise on the 9th of March relating to our disciplinary process and sanctions approach, which will run for 8 weeks until the 4th of May. So you may ask, why are we consulting? The consultation aims to facilitate the profession and key stakeholders to understand our proposals and rationale, and to solicit their views on how to ensure our proposed policies meet the expectations of the public through an effective disciplinary regime. We therefore welcome written submissions from our audience here. So this slide sets out the 5 consultation documents relating to the proposed disciplinary process and our sanctions approach. They are the draft outline of our disciplinary process, which applies to both PIEA auditors and professional persons, as well as the draft finding guidelines and sanctions policies, which apply to PIEA auditors and professional persons respectively. You may wonder why there are separate finding guidelines and sanctions policies, and here's the reason. Under the law, the AFRC has a legal obligation to publish and gazette the finding guidelines and to have regard to those guidelines before we impose a fine. On the other hand, there are no similar legal requirements for other types of sanctions. However, for transparency, we publish the sanctions policies to help regulators to understand our general approach to determining sanctions. The sanctions policies apply to all types of sanctions and not just fines. And next slide, please. With that, we turn to the engagement documents. In conjunction with the 5 consultation documents, we also include in our paper 3 engagement documents, as they are interrelated and should be read as a whole. These are the policy statements which apply to PIEA auditors on the one hand and professional persons on the other hand, as well as the guidance note on cooperation, which apply to all. The discipline policy statements provide a summary and overview of the legal framework under the law, the AFRCO. And we are not consulting on these documents because they are simply setting out what is in the law in a more reader-friendly manner. As for the cooperation guidance note, I will explain that in greater detail later. With that, I will now introduce the key features of our proposed disciplinary process, the details of which is set out in the outline that I just described earlier. Our process is designed to be independent, fair, and efficient. And I will spend some time on this slide because I appreciate this is the area where the audience might be most unfamiliar with, given that it is different from the Institute's disciplinary process, which is by way of contentious hearing. So with that, the first stage of the process is a recommendation made by the discipline department. So after an investigation, it's completed and passed on to the discipline department. The discipline department will conduct an assessment on whether there is sufficient evidence that warrants the taking of disciplinary action. This is similar, if you think about it, to what the DOJ, the Department of Justice, is doing in terms of whether there is assessing whether there is sufficient evidence to prosecute. And if the discipline department decides to commence disciplinary action, there will be a notice of proposed disciplinary action that will be sent out to the regulatee concerned. And the MPDA will basically set out the allegations, facts, evidence, our preliminary views and proposed sanctions, as well as enclosing a list of documents which sets out the underlying evidence and which the regulatee can request to obtain a copy. This process provides a reasonable opportunity for the regulatee to make representations to us in writing before we make recommendation to the board. After we consider all available information, we will make a recommendation to the AFRC board, which will make a decision. So this moves up to the next box. Our decision will be documented together with reasons in a decision notice. Pausing here, I would like to reiterate that our process is designed to be independent and fair because our board members are appointed by the government and independent from the profession, and 1/3 of our board members are ex-auditors, former practitioners who have a wealth of experience and knowledge in auditing and accounting issues. Our other board members also has a wealth of experience and include prominent barristers, solicitors, bankers, and other professionals. And moving on to the next stage, our process is also fair because there are sufficient procedural safeguards and the existing rights of regulatees are not prejudiced. If a regulator disagrees with our disciplinary decision, there is a right to apply to an independent tribunal for a fresh review of the decision. And this is a contentious hearing process, which is similar as the HKICPA's current disciplinary process. If a party to a review is dissatisfied with the decision of the tribunal, there is a further right of appeal to the Court of the Appeal with the leave of the court, which again is similar to the current process. So this completes my explanation of our disciplinary process. I would also like to reiterate that our process is fair and largely in line with that adopted by other local financial regulators such as the SFC, which is well tested in courts, well established, and with which the market is familiar. Next. Having described the disciplinary process, we now move on to sanctions. This slide summarizes the types of sanctions applicable to PIE auditors and professional persons. As these are the sanctions set out in the law, I won't go into much detail, but to point out that the list of the sanction powers over professional persons are basically the same as that in the current Professional Accountants Ordinance. You will see that there is a spectrum of sanctions powers available, including lighter sanctions like remedial actions and reprimand, to more serious ones like the imposition of fines and exclusionary sanctions like revocation and suspension of registration. The range of sanctions powers allow the FRC to discharge our function fairly, impartially, and effectively according to the circumstances of each case. Another point to note is the main difference between the maximum fine. The maximum fine under the law for misconduct committed by PIE auditors is 10 million Hong Kong dollars, or 3 times the amount of the profit gains or loss avoided as a result of the misconduct, as compared to 500,000 for professional persons. With that, I'll now talk about our approach of sanctions. Our approach are set out in defining guidelines and the sanctions policies, and if I were to summarize in 2 words of what we want to achieve, it would be proportionate and fair. But to unpack this a bit more, I will expand on the 3 bullets here. First, we will adopt a principle-based approach, which Clement has referred to earlier, which means we will apply the same set of principles in approaching each case. In particular, we will have regard to the regulatory objectives that I described earlier, as well as the guiding principles as set out in the diagram, which is to ensure our decisions are independent, fair, and impartial, and that we achieve effective regulatory outcomes through an efficient process. Second, we will also adopt the principle of proportionality in our sanctions approach. What this means is that our sanctions need to be proportionate to the misconduct. We will take into account a wide range of factors when determining the appropriate sanctions on a case-by-case basis, which I will explain a bit more in our next slide. We will also take into account the types of sanctions available and the maximum fine that I just described earlier. And as for my last point, transparency, what I mean is that further guidance as to how we apply these principles to specific factual scenarios will be made transparent through the publication of press releases and statements of disciplinary action, which will summarize our decision and the reasons. Thanks. And just to explain to our audience a little bit more on our sanctions approach, as I appreciate principles-based approach may be a bit hard to conceptualize. Here is a diagram on how we will approach sanctions generally. So for step 1, we will assess the misconduct itself to identify the appropriate sanction or combination of sanctions. In assessing the conduct, we will consider a wide range of factors, including its nature, seriousness, frequency, duration, and impact. The 5 bullets here are just the broad categories, and the finding guidelines and sanctions policy contain a more detailed list of the factors under each category. So, for example, in terms of the natures and seriousness of the conduct, we will consider the nature, extent, and importance of the professional standards breach. We will also consider the question of intent, whether the conduct was intentional, dishonest, reckless, or negligent, etc. And in terms of the impact of the conduct, we will consider, for example, whether the conduct has damaged public confidence in the quality of financial reporting, and whether it may have resulted in significant number of people suffering losses. For step 2, we will make any necessary adjustment to take into account any relevant aggravating or mitigating factors. Examples of aggravating and mitigating factors include the degree of cooperation, any past similar conduct, whether the regulator has taken steps to remediate, likelihood of recurrence of the misconduct, the regulator's compliance history and record, as well as whether the proposed sanction may put the regulator in financial jeopardy. The next slide is about our guidance note on cooperation. The key message we have here is we encourage our regulators to cooperate with us, as we believe this will benefit all parties concerned. The guidance note sets out examples of cooperative and uncooperative conduct and the factors that we will generally take into account in assessing the degree of cooperation. There are 2 key aspects of cooperation. The first aspect is that we encourage regulators to self-report to us if they identify potential non-compliance, take proactive steps to conduct root cause analysis and share your findings with us, and to remediate any control gaps identified. This is an approach taken by both international and local financial regulators, and we would like to encourage this amongst the profession because it will facilitate early detection and prompt remediation of misconduct, which will protect the public interest better. The second aspect is that we encourage early conclusion of cases through cooperation, credits, or discount, and settlement. Providing early and full cooperation may result in a reduction in the level of sanctions imposed, and settlement will result in cost saving for all parties concerned. That said, we wish to emphasize that merely fulfilling statutory or regulatory obligations does not in itself constitute cooperation, and also the FRC will only settle a case where it is in the public interest to do so. Finally, and to end on an upbeat note, I would repeat what I said at the beginning, which is that the primary purpose of our sanctions is not to punish. We would like to improve standards in the profession and avoid reoffending. And to achieve these, we would be open to ideas from firms about training and conducting independent review or root cause analysis as part of a package of disciplinary measures. We hope that this will promote a culture of responsibility and self-improvement. Thank you. And that's the end of my presentation, and I will pass it on to my colleague, Eva.
Thank you, Hester. Good evening, everybody. I'm Yvella from the FRC Inspection Department. My presentation today is to provide an introduction of the FRC expanded inspection power under the new regime. So as you all know, FRC is currently empowered to inspect PIEA engagement that are completed by PIEA auditor on or after 1st of October 2019. So under the new regime, our scope of inspections will cover all the practice unit. So no matter whether a CPA practice in his own name or practice in the form of partnership or corporate practice, all practice unit will be subject to the AFRC inspections under the new regime. Our inspections will cover two parts. First, we'll cover the firm-wide system of quality control, and it will also cover the selected individual engagement. This engagement can be an audit engagement or an assurance engagement. Our inspection will also cover the compliance with the AML guidelines, which are issued by the HKICPA. So let's move on to the approach of our inspections. So with respect to our approach of inspections, which will largely follow the HKICPA current practices, we will adopt the principle of proportionality. So when we talk about proportionality, our regulatory effort will be proportionate to the size, complexity of the practice unit, as well as to the level of public interest involved. For example, where a practice unit is involved in the audit of a regulatory industry, for example, a licensed corporation, it will be subject to a more frequent and wider scope of inspections than those which are allowed. And also for audit or assurance engagement which relate to public interest, which relate to a regulated industry, you will also have a high chance of being picked for inspections than those which are allowed. So in respect of the manner of inspections, there will be two manners. One is on-site inspection and the other one is desktop review. So for on-site inspection, it will be carried out at the firm offices, and then for the desktop review, it will be carried out at the AFRC offices. For the PIEA auditor, actually we will carry out on-site inspections only. And then with respect to the approaches, there is maybe, Ambrose, can you please on? Yes. And then with respect to the approaches, there will also be a progressive approach that the AFRC will adopt, or what we call a phase-in approach. And at the beginning of our transitions, our inspections will focus more on those engagements that have higher public interest. That means for practice unit, which actually audit entity of with higher public interest, and those non-PIEA engagement that are completed by PIEA auditor, they will have higher chance to be selected for our inspection at the very beginning. And then for small to medium-sized practices, we will also spend time at the beginning of our transition to understand their quality control system and to understand the difficulty and challenges they are facing, so that it will enable us to formulate a more effective inspection approach, and it will also allow those firms to have an opportunity to understand more about the AFRC inspection approach and methodology, and for them to get well prepared for the future inspections. And then let's move on to the processes of our inspections. So this slide actually shows a typical timetable for our on-site inspections. So as you can see, before the commencement of the on-site inspections, a practice unit will be notified of our intended inspections. So within 3 weeks' time, the practice unit is required to return the request information to the AFRC. And then we usually will start our on-site inspections within 6 weeks' time after you are notified for the inspections. And then when we kickstart the inspections, we will have an opening meeting with the firm's leaderships and the related personnel involved. And then when we have the on-site inspections, we will actually carry out inspections of the firm's system of quality control as well as selected engagement. Then depending on the size of the practice unit, the number of selected engagement can range from 1 to a few. So after the on-site inspections is completed, and then we will have an exit meeting with the firm. And then after the exit meeting, we normally will issue our data draft report to the firm within 6 weeks' time. And then the firm will have 3 weeks' time to respond in writing regarding our data draft report. And then after we receive the responses from the firm, then we will consider the responses and make any necessary changes to the report before it turns it into final. And then when the firm receives our final inspection report, it will be provided with 3 weeks' time to do the root cause analysis and provide the remediation plan for the AFRC. So this is a typical timetable for the on-site inspections, and I'm sure that for those PIEA auditors who have been subject to the FRC inspections before, this process will sound very familiar with them already. And then for the desktop review, although for most of the PIEA auditors you won't be subject to desktop review, but for completeness purpose, I also include here for your information. In case any practice unit is subject to desktop review, the process of inspections will be pretty much the same as what I explained just now, except for that the inspections will be carried out at the AFRC offices, and then the review time will be shorter given the complexities of this practice unit should be much simpler than those of PIEA auditor. So let's move on to the next part regarding our inspections results. So at the conclusion of the inspections, we will actually report our results for the engagement inspections as either no findings or have findings, and indicating the level of significance of the findings to be for those significant or just some other points to note, which is again familiar for those who have been subject to the HKI-CPA process review before. And then for the follow-up actions, under Part 3AA of the AFRCO, we can decide no follow-up actions or require the practice unit to take any measure or corrective actions, or we can carry out further inspections. And then for those engagements which we consider warrant and investigations, we will refer those engagements to our Department of Investigations and Compliance Department, and or even for those which we consider that we have already gathered very strong evidence or the practice unit already admit the wrongdoing, we will refer those engagements directly to our Department of Discipline for considerations. So at the end, I want to share with all the auditors here today regarding the preparations for an effective inspections. So I would like to share a couple of points which I consider important for those who want to have a very effective inspections. First, I think the tone at the top is very important, be it regarding the commitment to audit quality and be it regarding the attitude to our inspections. Secondly, because for our inspections, actually we have to inspect quite a lot of documents, be it relate to the firm-wide system of quality control and also for the audit files as well. So it's very important that proper record is kept. The third point is actually for our engagement inspections, we will have a lot of contact with the engagement team. So it would be good for the engagement team to get well prepared for any questions regarding the background and any significant risk and audit or accounting area of the engagement. For the quality control system, because we again have to review a lot of documents and may have a lot of questions to ask, so it would be good for those persons who are responsible for the firm-wide system of quality control be available for questions. And so in case if you are not sure about the questions asked, please clarify with us. And also, I think it is also very important for firms to take immediate and robust remediation actions to address any quality deficiencies that we identify. So before I pass it to Wincy, I would also like to take this opportunity to share the survey report that the FRC just published regarding the implementation progress by the PIEA auditor for the new and revised quality management standard. Last Thursday, actually, we have published a report on the survey results regarding the implementation progress of the new and revised quality management standard. And based on the survey results, actually, less than half of the PIEA auditor have formulated their implementation plan. So I would also like to take this opportunity to urge those who are lagging behind their peers to take necessary steps as soon as they can to ensure that they will be able to meet the implementation deadline by the end of this year. The report is available at the FRC website, and it has also been sent to all the PIEA auditors. So that's my end of my presentation, and let me hand over to Wincy, who will talk about the investigation.
Thank you, Eva. Hi, I'm Wincy Lam, Head of Investigation and Compliance, and I would like to provide a brief overview of the changes that's been introduced by the further reform in relation to the investigation function. Next slide, please. So for the investigation function, similarly, the further reform also expanded our remit to cover all practice units and also CPAs. They are named as the professional persons. Under the new AFRC ordinance, there's no changes to the powers in relation to investigation against PIEA auditors and registered responsible persons. For the professional persons, the powers under the new ordinance are largely the same as those under the current PAO. Next slide, please. So in respect of professional persons, if there is a reason to inquire that whether the professional persons has committed a professional irregularity, then the AFRC can initiate an investigation. So what is professional irregularity? On the slide, I've set out some examples of professional irregularity, which include falsifying a document, making false statements, failure to observe, maintain, or apply PAO professional standard, failure to comply with the AML requirements, negligent, guilty of professional misconduct, or dishonorable conduct. Next slide, please. So what are the powers of the investigator in conducting the investigations? So investigator can issue certain requirements to specified persons. So who are the specified persons? For professional persons, there are four main types of specified persons that we can actually issue requirements to. They are the professional person, an employee or former employee of a professional person, and also a student registered with the HICPA. If the investigation relates to a practice unit, then an employee or former employee of the practice unit. If the investigation relates to a CPA, then the employer or former employer of the CPA. You can see that the types of persons that we can issue requirements are narrower than the ones that apply for the investigation against PIEA auditors. So on the left-hand side, which lists out the types of specified persons that we can issue requirement to for PIEA auditors investigations. Basically, there are any persons that the investigator has reasonable cause to believe that they have relevant information in their possessions that are relevant to the investigations. Next slide, please. So for the requirements, what type of requirements we can issue to the specified persons? So for the professional persons investigations, we can issue requirements for the production of any record or documents relevant to the investigation, give explanation or further particulars in relation to any records or documents produced by the professional persons or the specified persons, give the investigator all assistance necessary in connection with the investigations. So again, here you can see that the requirements are a bit narrower than the ones that we can issue to the PIEA auditors, which also include requesting the specified persons to attend interviews with the investigator or providing verification by a statutory declaration. Next slide, please. So on this slide, I've set out a brief overview of the investigation process. For our investigation function, the sources of our work comes from a number of channels, including complaints from the public, reports by whistleblowers, referrals from other regulators or law enforcement agencies, referrals from internal referrals from the inspection function. We also have a proactive financial statements review program, which currently only applicable to financial statements of listed entities. So when we receive the complaints or reports or referral, we will assess the information received. If there is a possible if there is possible irregularity being committed by the professional persons, then the AFRC will initiate investigations and appoint investigators who are generally the staff of the investigation department. During the investigation, we will exercise the powers given under the AFRCO, which I've mentioned in the earlier slides. After reviewing all the information received under the requirements issued to the specified person, then the department will prepare an investigation report. A dated draft of the investigation report will be given to the persons being under investigations and also any other person named in the draft for an opportunity of being heard. And after this, we will complete the investigation reports. And there are two results arising from the investigations. So if the allegation have not been substantiated during the investigation, then we will close the case without further action. Otherwise, we will refer the case to the Department of Discipline for consideration of any disciplinary actions. So as Hester mentioned before, we have also issued the guidance on the cooperation. So the cooperation at the investigation process was also very important in the whole disciplinary proceedings. So we encourage our regulators to cooperate during the investigations process. Thank you. I'll pass it on to Ambrose to talk about the registration and licensing.
Okay, thank you, Wincy. Upon the commencement of the amended ordinance, the FRC's registration power registration power will be extended to audit practitioners and practices, which include the registration of firms, the registration of corporate practices, the PIE auditors, as well as the issue of practicing certificate to certified public accountants. The HKICPA will remain to be the registration authority of CPAs and continue to administer professional exams, including the local CPA qualifying exam and practicing certificate examinations, CPD mechanism, as well as the mutual and reciprocal recognition agreement with accountancy body of other jurisdictions in relation to CPA registration in Hong Kong. When the HKICPA performs these statutory functions, they will be subjected to the oversight by the AFRC. The philosophy and the approach of the AFRC on the registration and licensing function is to enhance the quality of auditors. We serve as the gatekeeping function of the quality of the auditing profession, which ensures the professional ethics, integrity, and the competency of the profession. And with the registration and licensing criteria will be largely the same. By doing so, the AFRC will foster independent and impartial regulations, as well as conducting rigorous assessments and monitor auditors' ongoing compliance. As I've said, the registration criteria will largely remain the same. So let me highlight some key criteria for registration and renewal of firms, corporate practices, as well as PIE auditors. For the composition of firms and corporate practices, all partners and directors are still required to be CPAs, and at least a portion of partners and directors are CPA practicing. In the past, it is the HKI CPA who specified the minimum proportion of the partners or directors to be CPA practicing. Upon the commencement of the amended ordinance, it will be the AFRC who specify the minimum proportion of practicing certificate holders in a firm as well as in a corporate practice. And on the requirement on the Article of Association and also for the professional indemnity, there are no change in requirement, and the requirements are still remain to be set by the HKI CPA. For the PIE auditors, the key registration criteria also remain the same, where every partners of the firm, directors of corporate practices, and responsible person are required to be fit and proper person to be a CPA. And the quality control system responsible person is required to be the CPA, CEO, or a member of the managing board of partners. And every responsible person is required to be a fit and proper person to be a CPA. For issue and renewal of practicing certificates, as said, the key criteria remain the same. In here, there is a new requirement for the satisfaction of the key and fit and proper requirement to be a CPA under the PAO. In the past, it is the requirement that the practicing certificate holder he needs to be a CPA, and to be a CPA, he needs to be a fit and proper person. And now it is this fit and proper requirement to be a CPA is clearly specified as a registration requirement as a practicing certificate holder. And for the specific amount of full-time approved accounting experience, there has been no change in the requirement. And the PC holders still required to be ordinary resides in Hong Kong. He should not be subject to sanctions or disciplinary order of AFRC or HKI CPA that prevents the person from being issued with a PC. And he also needs to be intended to practice as a CPA practicing. From the commencement of AFRCO, the AFRC will register firms, corporate practices, PIE auditors, and issue practicing certificates to CPA practicing. And we will also start receive and evaluate all the renewal applications. And the planned application period for PC, firms, and corporate practices are expected to be from the 1st of November to the 15th of December 2022. And for registered PIE auditors, it will be from the 1st of October to the 16th of November 2022. And typically, we would require 30 business days to process the applications. And we will also collect the application fees. For the PC, firms, and corporate practices, in the first year of implementation, the application fees are exempted. And thereafter, initially, the fee will not be higher than that collected by the HKI CPA. And for the registered PIE auditors, the new application fee will be $250, and for the renewal, it will be $200, which will not be changed from the current rate scale. And also for the applications in 2022, we expect to require more information than in the previous years. And on the practice guide and the revised application form will also be available on the AFRC's website in August 2022. So it completes my presentation on the registration and licensing functions of the AFRC.
So now may I invite FRC Chairman Dr. Kelvin Wong to give us a closing remark.
Yeah. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, President Loretta. Thank you, Chairman Clement, and also Margaret, CEO at the Institute. Certainly, we are very pleased to be invited to this forum, which is jointly organized by the Institute and also PIEA. Even though we are all good friends, but then the point is when it boils down to business, I understand that we have to sort out our concerns in a very open and honest manner. President Loretta mentioned in her opening remarks saying that she was looking forward to a constructive process by providing meaningful input to our consultation paper. And with that, I thank you very much. We look forward to receiving professional insight and then the candid opinion reflecting not only members' concern, but then members' valid concern that is most important, that will allow the AFRC to be transformed to become an even more effective regulator. So that for that, I have to thank you for setting the scene regarding our engagement today. And for Chairman Clement, I thank you in providing such an excellent opportunity by inviting me here, because originally I intended to shy away a bit because I have my CEO here, but then Clement suggested that I should be here to learn, because I would be able to at least earn 2 hours CBD. But then I believe because also Chairman Clement also raised a question regarding what FRC wants to achieve based on all the consultations and our transformation to become AFRC. What do we want to achieve? Then it struck me. I believe that firstly we are partners, so therefore we want to sing the same music. We want to sing the same song. It takes two to tango, right? And then Clement did mention about the devils are in the details. So here comes all the details. But then to complete Clement's statement, the devils are in the details, I couldn't agree more. But then I believe that the angel is in the sky. When we all look to the sky, we have hope. So therefore, I believe that not only are we tangling together, but if we are able to look into the future, how to ensure, how to achieve, and how to get there in order to have a healthy, sustainable accounting profession long term. I believe that's the dream for all accounting professions, especially for those who are passionate about the industry. It is a matter of how. Of course, we started at the FRC. That was a year ago when we published our first report, the market study. I cannot claim any credit because it was performed and conducted by our colleague. But then the point is we are not yet there. After knowing the market, so what? It isn't a new conclusion. We understand the market is highly concentrated, and we all understand that the audit fee for among PIE auditors in the past 10 years, on average, only rose by less than 1 percentage point per annum. So what does that mean? Today, when we attended the FA panel at the Legislative Council, Edmund and Nelson did raise a point regarding whether it is possible for Hong Kong FRC to consider making a tariff for audit fee similar to that in Singapore. Now, I don't have crystal ball. I don't know, but then I would say probably this is not the right approach for Hong Kong to have a tariff regarding audit fee among PIE auditors. But then the point is, now given the fact that there was almost a perfect storm as rightly mentioned by Clement regarding the Great Resignation, reporting season, and also Omicron. But then the point is, based on the collective effort and wisdoms among the PIE auditors, you guys collectively sailed the rough sea. And then the companies being suspended tradings was actually a lot lower comparing to the same period last year. So what does that mean? If we act together, we can make a change. So therefore, to me, how to ensure audit fee for among auditors are a good reflection of the audit quality, to me will be a very, very important agenda for the AFRC to work together with Institute and also PIEA. It is easier said than done, but then I believe this is, if not the most important agenda, at least one of the top agenda for the AFRC going forward. So with that, I'm hopeful that through effective engaging with key stakeholders, including the Institute PIEA, and then let me tell you that we have altogether 19 engagements. We have just finished 3, because we have finished the SCAA's one, and we just finished the Hong Kong IOD's one this afternoon. So therefore, there will be 16 more to go. I believe that it isn't easy because we will be engaging with a whole host of stakeholders, not only auditors, but business accountants. We even engage with the Hong Kong Association of Banks, who are in charge of ensuring integrity of financial report. So therefore, please, in case you have any more comments or critique that you believe will benefit the accounting profession as a whole, feel free to approach us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wong, and thank you all the panel speakers. It comes to the end of our forum today, and thank you all for your participation. This forum will be converted into an e-learning course. In case you have friends who cannot join us today, they can watch the online version afterwards. Okay, thank you and good night.